It wasn't until the late 19th century that we discovered that washing hands helped reduce the spread of germs and improve health outcomes. And it was the middle of the 20th century when antibiotics began to be used regularly and intentionally to kill harmful bacteria. Here in the 21st century, the information age is driving a similar sea change in the delivery of care. But no matter what changes we see in the advance of digital health or pharmaceutical product development, there's no question that hospital medicine, the place where that care is delivered, is the epicenter of those changes wrought by the information age. Hello and welcome to Data Point, the podcast where we talk about all the ways that data and analytics are driving innovation in healthcare today. I'm your host, Greg Matthews, and our guest this week is Dr. William Rice, the Senior Vice President of Clinical Innovation for St. David's Healthcare. In this role, Dr. Rice supports a portfolio of informatics initiatives focused on usability, variation, analytics, and modeling, and works to deploy a formalized innovation infrastructure across the St. David's healthcare system. Prior to joining St. David's Healthcare, Dr. Rice served as Chief Medical Officer of White Glove House Call Health, a company he co-founded. In addition to his 14 years of experience in clinical emergency medicine, Dr. Rice has participated in the formation and initial work of a number of early-stage healthcare companies. Dr. Rice holds a patent for a system and method to optimize the care of chronic disease patients. He's the author of a book entitled American Healthcare 2008: Opportunities for Disruptive Improvement. In 2013, Dr. Rice was appointed by Governor Perry to the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas, where he serves as a member of the Oversight Committee. In short, there's nobody better to walk us through how hospital medicine is taking advantage of the opportunities available to us in the information age. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Rice just as much as I did. Bill, thank you so much for being with us on Data Point today.
Thank you, Greg. It's great to be here.
Since coming to St. David's as head of clinical innovations, can you tell us a little bit about some of your priorities? What are some of the things that happen, in that epicenter of the health ecosystem as you described the hospital?
At its core, what I work on is four things, basically: quality, safety, efficiency, and experience. All of those are sort of, everybody has the triple aim and the three legs of the stool, or the four legs of the stool, the four wheels on the tire, whatever it all is. To me, that's kind of the core of what we work on. And as you think about hospital medicine, there's just lots of areas of work that are empowered by kind of the digitalization of so much of what's happening in healthcare. So let me see if I can unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, let's talk about hospital medicine. What does that actually mean to you? It seems like it could mean a lot of different things.
Right. Well, hospital has changed. Hospital medicine has changed in that, what was formerly just hospital is now hospital more or less plus 90 days. Is conceptually how we think about it, or 90 days or 30 days. I mean, readmission penalties and bundles have us thinking differently about, hospital medicine per se, and we certainly now have a bigger view of it. That's one thing. It's amazing that, you have best practices which describe, sets of processes and the things you do to optimize the outcome of some thing in clinical medicine, basically. And then what you learn is that when you peel the onion back further and further deeper into the data, you can ask more and more questions about, the elements that drive the outcome that you could ever see before. So let me see if I can give an example.
Yeah.
Let's talk about C. diff. C. diff is a common infection in hospitals. Not common, but I'm saying it's a commonly infection of common concern across the
Absolutely.
U.S. C. diff infection rates are one of the quality metrics we have. And it's well known that how do you minimize C. diff? You try to avoid broad spectrum antibiotics. You have a program which tries to make sure you clean rooms well. You may screen high-risk patients. There's a carrier rate. There's numbers of things that are involved in that. And so you work to try to drive a program in a hospital or a facility that meets all those elements and checks those boxes and make sure you do that well. And probably what we've learned is that the very best of the very best go deeper than that, because that gets you so far. But
okay.
If you're in the top decile performance for C. diff, you have zero infections. You don't have less or few. You have zero. So how do you get to that? And so you peel back the onion more deeper. And the example I would use, the specific example is asking questions like, well, who's ordering C. diff, and do we always order it perfectly? And what are the indications for a C. diff test? And do we have false positives? And how does our carrier rate compare with our lab outcome positivity rate? And one of the things we've bumped into is the question of frequency of ordering the C. diff test. So again, I'm sorry I'm quite so deep into the weeds and all this, but believe it or not, that's an important place you've got to go for C. diff. So in this example or discussion, you can look at physicians across your whole hospital. Only look at physicians who've seen, let's say, 200 patients or more in the last 180 days. And you can ask the question, what percentage of those patients, maybe excluding OB or something, and excluding, small pediatrics or whatever,
Sure.
but look across, adult medicine, what percentage of patients, and by doctor, what percentage of patients get a C. diff test? Mm-hmm. And what you'll find out is that the variation in C. diff testing can be a 10x, right?
Wow.
For whatever reason, some people order it more, some people order it less. Maybe that you're a GI doctor, an infectious disease doc, and we expect that you would order it more. So, you've got to look into your data. But nonetheless, if you don't peel back the onion that far and look sort of deep into that realm, then you miss the opportunity to kind of help a physician or physicians sort of understand whether they tend to be a little more frequent in their ordering and maybe less frequent. And again, you've got the noise of carriers and false positives, and so that's why it's especially important to make sure you're only testing people with significant symptoms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a little bit in the weeds, but that's just an example of, a bit of a value proposition for a clinical problem, which is a meaningful and important one. And there's hundreds basically like that. We're trying to minimize readmissions, as does everybody. We have readmission penalties for Medicare patients, certain Medicare fee-for-service patients. That's the readmission reduction program. We try to minimize readmissions in hospital medicine by doing a bunch of things, which everybody in the whole world knows what those are. You want to do patients need to have a good follow-up plan with a physician, with a specialist or primary care physician. They need to know what their meds are and understand what their meds are. They need to be able to get their meds. They need to be able to get home or to whatever that next location is for the discharge, after discharge.
Yep.
And there's kind of like 10 or so classically defined things that need to happen, and every hospital tries to do that really, really well. And whatever that turns into, it's never perfect. And so patients do end up coming back to the emergency room thereafter, and sometimes they get readmitted for different things. And so and what we studied is, when we went deep into this conversation, is that probably about 1 in 5 patients that come back, I'm talking about Medicare fee-for-service, we're just addressing the readmission program and trying to think about that. About 1 in 5 patients come back and they have a length of stay of less than 2 days.
Okay.
So all of a sudden, when you study that and you kind of go deeper into that whole question, you realize that some patients that come back to the emergency room, and we do have patients that come back to the emergency room, and we check them out and do what we need to do and do an evaluation, and then help them, and then they can go home or to a home health or back to a skilled nursing or whatever. But the point is that there is a group of people that about 20% of all those that do come back in probably have, if we could work more dynamically to coordinate what happens to those folks. I mean, again, I'm not talking about the people that come back who, just need a little something and then they can be discharged home. That's not
Sure.
but the ones that have a little more problem, a little more complexity, and we need, some 6-hour or 12-hour thing, what we'd call observation maybe, or whatnot. We're refining sort of the recognition of that, and it turns out we think that's an opportunity to help people, not have to come back and get readmitted more effectively than what we have done historically. And again, we want people who don't really need to be in the hospital not to have to come to the hospital, because at the end of the day, you, your parents, your children, you don't want to be in the hospital unless you have to be. If you have to be, that's fine and fantastic. We're going to take care of you as best we always can. But on the other hand, if you don't really need to be there, we want to hold that bed for somebody that needs it, a little worse, whatever. So we're working very actively to sort of recognize those patients. And again, now you've got a little chance for a little artificial intelligence to build a predictor that says, okay, let's look at 1,000 patients or 5,000 patients that came back to an emergency room over the last 3 or 4 years, and the ones that only stayed 2 days. What's common about them? Mm-hmm. They have fewer comorbidities. They may be a little younger. They may have this or that or the other, or a combination of this and that and the other. And so a little machine learning, in that case, a very specific case, that probably helps us predict who more precisely who needs or doesn't need to be in. And so that's the magic of quote unquote machine learning and AI. And it's much more that than I'm going to, tell you at some moment in your life on, at 9:32 on February 17th, you're going to sprain your ankle.
Right.
AI is not going to do that.
That's the equivalent of the flying car.
That's the flying
example.
car, exactly.
Yeah.
So that brings it back to reality.
So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to be right back with Dr. Bill Rice. Stick around for the Data Point podcast.
Today's show is brought to you by Blue Spire, a full-service digital marketing agency focused on complex and highly regulated industries of healthcare, senior living, and financial services. Rapid changes in the healthcare industry are causing consumers to seek out trusted advice, demand more transparency, and access to information and content. With over 30 years of healthcare experience, Blue Spire knows how to help you reach, communicate with, and gain trust from these consumers. We help you engage with the right content at every touch point, from the first symptom search to appointment scheduling through care management. Visit us at bluespiremarketing.com to learn how we can help you deliver relevant, engaging content through ever-changing touch points that matter.
Welcome back to Data Point. I'm your host, Greg Matthews. We're here talking to Dr. Bill Rice, who is the head of clinical innovation at St. David's. And Bill, you were talking to us a little bit about what led into this role. Can you give us a sense of, as a clinical innovations leader in a major health system, what does that look like? How do you model that in today's hospital medicine? What does that look like to you?
It almost makes me think about sort of how I came to this hospital side anyway. And obviously, my clinical background was emergency medicine for many years, and we were on the business side. Actually, we built a company and took it public, of all things. And then after that, I spent some decade or so in the VC world, and kind of lived and breathed early stage innovation, whatnot. And the other end of the spectrum really is hospital medicine, large institutions. So it's a fair question to say, kind of like, how and why did that happen? And I guess what I'd say is that, I've been with St. David's and HCA 8 years, and in that time frame, I was sort of thinking about this convergence of data, which has been pouring forth as we all have watched it come these last decade, and I was having this vision of a NASA mission control about where the hospital system and hospitals are the most expensive, I'll say the most complex. And I don't want to say dangerous, but there are places where a lot of intense complexity can go on, almost more so than any place else I can think of in society, right? You've got, an organization, in our case of St. David's, of 10,000 people, and you're trying to do a very specific thing, which is take excellent, world-class care of patients every day, in a multitude of things, from delivery of a NICU baby to grandma or grandpa who's in their 90s or 100 or whatever they might be.
Yeah.
Big, huge spectrum. And so you kind of envision that the way this all plays out is not like flying cars so much. It is something that turns in probably to a command center, like a mission control, where you're really in a new way pulling in data that's been heretofore largely in the hands of an individual in a moment in time, and you have the ability to sort of essentially integrate that massively so that groups of people can be aware of information, and you can sort of reconfigure how programs and processes and whatnot happen for the benefit of the patients and as they traverse through a stay. And so that's what's exciting and interesting about hospital medicine now. And again, what I just described is a little bit of a flying car, but we're going to get there with command centers and hospitals that, you can imagine, certainly with our association with HCA, we've thought, someone's going to come into the hospital right now at this moment and this day. And it may be, again, I'm just saying this just for no particular reason, a 75-year-old female with heart failure and something else and something else and something else. Well, I'm going to go peer into the last 20,000 patients that look the most like that patient into the HCA data set. and say, the patients that most like her, what do we do that provided the very best outcome?
Yep.
And this is really at our fingertips now in the next year or so to really get that organized. But that's coming, and that's not a flying car. So that was the opportunity I saw is that kind of stuff. And again, this is not, new kinds of genomics or new kinds of proteomics or new kinds of anything. It's just organizing what we already have in a better way to flow. So
absolutely, and being able to put that in the hands of the clinicians who are ultimately going to be making decisions.
Or the groups of decisions that can make the group decision as opposed to the doctor gets a lab report at a certain time at a certain date. I want to send that lab report to the team of people that can make the best group decision and all that. So that's part of it. So this all comes out of of this innovation background. So I was going to share that for a second, just to think about with my innovation title, which I'm proud and happy to have. I see a lot of people knock on the door, let's say, and want to bring some idea. And so that's been an interesting journey to sort of learn more about. I mean, you learn this in the, in startups and in early stage companies, what is the value proposition?
Yeah.
And, at the end of the day of any startup, I mean, if it's a startup company you're trying to be successful, that has to include in the startup context sales of something, a value proposition that's inarguable to somebody. And what's interesting in healthcare, again, many people are interested in healthcare. There's lots of healthcare innovation. Healthcare innovators often don't understand who the customer is. So I have lots of people that come and want to sell me something, and they don't really understand the customer. And so I break it down into kind of the idea that, a lot of times things that we can do benefit different groups. And so to get there, let me just do it this way. When I buy a book on Amazon, I make a purchase and I give them my credit card and there's a transaction and then I get my book. And I get the book delivered by UPS or somebody.
Pretty straightforward.
And so it's a very straightforward value proposition, me to Amazon or whoever, et cetera. In healthcare, when I do a transaction, quote unquote a transaction, I've got a financial beneficiary. I probably have a clinical beneficiary. Now let's go back. The financial beneficiary is probably the payer if I do something great and maybe it's efficient or better than what was out there before. And that's our goal these days is quality, safety, efficiency, and patient experience being wonderful, et cetera. So one part of the value proposition may go to one thing, like the payer.
Sure.
Another part of the value proposition, which might be the clinical outcome, goes to, of course, the patient, patient's family,
and their
whatever.
Family, yeah.
Another part might be the operational piece about what's the cost or the effort to do, how complex to do it on the operational side. So those are just the three things that come to mind. But the point is that all of those pieces are part of the overall value proposition. And if you try to come and bring an innovation into healthcare and those are not aligned in the way, if you don't have a deep understanding of how those align, then you may try to sell the wrong thing to the wrong customer. And I've had that happen a lot,
Yep.
And so I just make that observation as an observation.
When you think about that role, it seems like it could cover everything, right? This is an enormous task. How do you break it down? Are there categories that you tend to focus on as you're thinking about your role supporting those different customers?
Yeah. So great question. Again, there's this golden era right now in this this informatics era that we're in, and in the hospital realm, we think of it at least in terms of a few things, but I'll think of just operationally. Certainly there's clinical quality, and there's clinical quality and safety is always first. Of importance, number one, et cetera. But operationally, that we work on things like throughput, and the question is how do you use digital information to work on efficient throughput through the hospital, movement, unexpected, recognition of unexpected things. I guess these are classes of informatics tools. There could be timers. There are care coordination kind of tools that drive things like group awareness. And so we think that's an interesting kind of way to think about how to organize or what we organize in hospital medicine to try to optimize what's going on. So again, right now it's in January. It happens to be in January. Thankfully, it's a relatively light flu season. Famous last words, as long as you don't have the flu
Exactly.
right now. But it is a lighter season than last year. But, hospitals are working on throughput. And the question is, how can you use informatics in a way to drive optimization of your throughput and recognition of who is, again, safe and who is less safe and who is actually changing in a negative way or changing in a positive way in your hospital right now. Kind of back to that command center system.
Yeah.
And we're building tools literally so that you can watch these kinds of evolutions in real time. And we can imagine, and really we're building this right now. For instance, let's just talk about case management. Case management is more sort of focused on people that are in the hospital but now need to sort of be managed and thought about as they anticipate a transition to a post-discharge location. Could be home health, could be skilled nursing and all that. So we kind of envision a case management command center, really, which would be a room where maybe a hospital case manager would have, one display which is looking at the emergency room and noticing, what the movement of the emergency room is now. And for instance, how many patients in the emergency room right now were discharged within the last 30 days? Because I want to be particularly careful about those people who are now signaling by their presence in the emergency room back that they're in a different place than they wanted or expected to be, or that we wanted or expected them to be. So that's one piece. A case manager might have another screen that shows all the patients with a pending discharge order, all the patients who by maybe some AI algorithm, machine learning algorithm, we predict would usually go home today, given their age and their diagnosis and their co-diagnosis and all that. You might also have part of that screen to say who actually has a discharge order written. And then what we've built is another thing that says, what are the barriers to discharge? So Dr. Jones has said Mrs. Smith is ready to go home. He or she's written a discharge order, but the patient can't quite go home yet because we're waiting on one of the following, durable medical equipment, DME, a ride, the lab result to come back for that last thing we're just double checking, for waiting on the cardiologist to come by. So we built a little system where the care team can check off which of those things are the barriers, so that whoever's watching and coordinating case management, and that could be, again, the case management captain, it could be the CMO of the hospital, it could be the CEO of the hospital who's interested in how patient flow is going.
Sure. And
then he or she might, sort on all the patients waiting on a physician to drop by, the consulting physician to drop by to give the final okay before a patient goes home. And quite frankly, you could pick up the phone and call a physician and say, hey, are you tied up in surgery? They're waiting on you for these 4 patients and these 3 rooms, 4 rooms, whatever, ...
Yeah.
So you can imagine operational efficiency that just sort of happens by bringing up what was formerly a case manager on the floor and a nurse who said, well, Dr. Steve wrote an order for discharge for Mrs. whatever, and we're waiting on the surgeon to come by, and it's and then they're off to the next patient.
Right.
So you enable a swarm of people to be aware of what the operational issues are as opposed to the individual. So that's an example of what we're trying to do in 100 different areas.
No, and that completely makes sense. To be honest with you, it's one of those things that it feels like nurses have always coordinated those things in their heads.
No, that's right.
But it's a way of taking it out of the nurse's head and actually being able to look at it across the institution.
And you mentioned this before. That's kind of the the same story, different chapter on things like quality management and section meetings. And, we look at data on a monthly basis, that's fine. If I can pull in quality kind of drivers, and we call it clinical decision support, right into the real time, then that's when it's most meaningful. I mean, physicians studying perfection or near perfection or non-perfection in outcomes from a month ago or a quarter ago is not nearly as effective, obviously, as something that just, is a little signal that they get right in real time that says this patient has this, ... or your rate of ordering this is this compared to average, or whatever it would be. Bringing stuff into real time is kind of our theme, I guess.
Absolutely. And it makes complete sense. I know one of the areas where you've spent a lot of time and energy over the years is on cancer research, and where we're heading with regard to the treatment of cancer. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the points of emphasis that you're focused on relative to cancer today?
Yes, thank you. I'm an emergency physician by training, so I am not an oncologic specialist, obviously. Having said that, I was asked to join the board of CPRIT actually a little over 5 years ago. So CPRIT is the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas. And that's a very interesting organization. It was funded by by a bond mechanism. I guess that's not important, 10 years ago or so, or just coming up on 10 years. And basically what it does is it puts $300 million a year in Texas into cancer research. And that's interesting because essentially that more than doubles the cancer research that is otherwise funded by the National Cancer Institute. So if I hover back up, National Cancer Institute is the largest cancer research funding organization in the country, probably the world. About, I've forgotten exactly, but $5.5, maybe $6 billion by now. Yeah. They fund cancer research across the United States. Texas gets a portion of that, which is somewhat proportional to the number of cancer researchers in the state, and that number is something in the $210 or $220 million a year funded research to academic institutions, and the CPRIT funding essentially more than doubles that. So that's interesting. And again, we're talking about academic research. We're talking about Texas, the Simmons Cancer Institute at Southwestern, the MD Anderson, of course, the Baylor Medical Center, Cancer Institute in Houston, other cancer research that goes on in Lubbock or Galveston or San Antonio. We have 3 comprehensive cancer research centers in Texas, and cancer research going on in all the academic institutions. Anyway, long story short, I got asked to be on the board of that, and so I've been on that board for some years. And the principal question you carry is what is it that CPRIT can do to accelerate progress in cancer research? The mission of CPRIT is to decrease the suffering from cancer for the citizens of Texas, and also to support the the growth and the strength of the bioscience, the cancer oncology, at least bioscience industry and research in Texas, et cetera. So we thought a lot about how you explore that, and what I would share is the following. It is an informatics game, and there's something called multi-scale modeling, which I just want to touch on for a second. So this is how it plays. We largely think about, in any context, in biology and whatnot, we think about genes. Genes control everything. If you just knew the genomics of a problem, you kind of would solve the problem. And it's actually, it's kind of like, it's not that simple. And so it turns out that genes do, of course, control. Gene expression is what controls protein production. So gene sequence is important, and gene, mutations can drive, things that turn into cancer. And some cancers, that's all it is. And I mean, not to say it's all it is, but the point is that that's the fault. There's something called epigenetics, which is essentially the idea that some things which are not genes, but some things that you can it's diet, toxins, your rest, your hormones, your this and that and the other. Some things can affect the way cancer genes express, or the way genes express themselves, but they aren't actually genetic changes. So you and I could have our genes sequenced, and they could be exactly the same, but yet your epigenetic or my epigenetic character, because I did this or that and the other, means that my gene for X, Y, or Z isn't going to express the same as yours.
This has been tremendous, giving us a view of the pragmatic methods that you're using to improve hospital medicine today, but also a view to the future about where we're heading and, man, some of the really exciting things happening in oncology today. Thank you so much, Dr. Rice. I really appreciate you being a guest on the show.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks so much for listening to the Data Point podcast. If you like what you've heard, please do rate, review, and share it with your social network. It means a lot. And if you have ideas for show topics or guests, please email them to me at greg@healthquant.health or send a direct message to @ChiMoose on Twitter. That's CHIMOOSE on Twitter. For more information about this show or any of the terrific healthcare podcasts in the Touchpoint Media Network, check them out at touchpoint.health. See you next time.
This has been a Touchpoint Media production. To learn more about this show and others like it, please visit us online at touchpoint.health.